Let's go from bad to worse on Mount Everest. Sure, scaling the world's tallest peak sounds like a thrill reserved for the brave and bold. But some climbers take it up a notch by going rogue.
New Zealand climber Mark Ingalls became the first double
Questions of morality have been raised after
Controversial mountaineering made climbing the world's most heartless
Ingalls became a pariah in the climbing
effort to save stricken British climber David Sharp on Mount Everest.
Imagine sneaking past the gates of a Hollywood blockbuster set, but instead of dodging security, you're battling altitude sickness and icy death traps, from daring snowboard descents to unauthorized solo ascents. These climbers threw caution and rules to the wind. But Everest doesn't play around, and the stakes are as high as they can get. Buckle up for a saga of rebels on the roof of the world. As always, viewer discretion is advised. This is the story of Lydia Brady, the first woman to reach the top of Mount Everest without supplementary oxygen, and to do so solo. She may have broken records, but she didn't follow the rules to get there. Her venture made history, but it also caused a lot of controversy. This story takes us back to 1988. Lydia was part of a New Zealand team that traveled to Kathmandu to connect with some other climbers from Czechoslovakia on a mission to climb Mount Everest. There were two routes that the climbers had permission to climb, Lhotse and Everest's southwest face. But these routes were incredibly steep and didn't have good climbing conditions. Lydia's teammates both turned back, unable to make the climb.
I was at Camp 2, having got there from base camp that day, and they came down from trying the South Pillar and saying, "We're tired, we couldn't summit, we're going home."
But Lydia was determined to get to the top, even if it meant traveling alone. She set out on her journey and examined which route would be her safest bet. If she wanted to make it to the top, then the safest way would be to take the South Col route. There was only one problem. She didn't have permission to climb this route. That wasn't going to stop her. She was already familiar with this route from previous ventures and knew that it had well-defined steps. She started her journey by making the 26,246-foot hike from Camp 2 to Camp 4. The following day, on October 14, 1988, at 2 a.m., she started her journey up the summit to the top of Mount Everest. The climbing conditions were much better on this route, with the ground having hard-packed snow, which was a lot easier to climb on. Once she got further up the summit, there were footprints embedded in the snow from a Spanish team of climbers, making it easier for her to continue her journey. After nearly 12 hours of climbing, she met the Spanish climbers. It was around 2:40 p.m., and they advised her that it was too late to continue the trek. But Lydia had her mind set on making that summit. By the time she reached the top, time was no longer on her mind. Lydia may have accomplished her goal of hitting the summit on her own, but once she was there, she had to think about how she was going to get down and what kind of trouble she was going to be in.
I knew I was going to survive only if I got going again. I was completely scared about not getting down.
She started her journey back down the mountain. When she met the area where the Spanish climbers were stationed, she stopped for some rest and water. While she was exhausted, she was also grateful to be safe and alive. But things weren't so good for her when she finally got back to the base of Everest. 4 of the Czech climbers were caught in bad weather and disappeared. Her teammates had already headed back to New Zealand, leaving her out there alone. On top of all of this, she was also in trouble for climbing a route that she didn't have permission to take. The Ministry of Tourism was threatening to take action when they found out that Lydia took an illegal route to climb the mountain peak. She was looking at a lot of penalties, including a 5 to 10-year climbing ban.
If you climb a route without a permit in Nepal, you generally get a ban for 5, but mostly 10 years.
In order to avoid these punishments, Lydia withdrew her claim that she climbed to the top of Mount Everest. She didn't provide any supporting documentation to her claim. Typically, climbers must submit proof, things like photos of altimeters or GPS screens, but that didn't stop the controversy. The media started to make a mockery out of her. All the headlines were questioning, did she or didn't she? But avoiding the penalties didn't bring comfort to Lydia. After all, this was her story to tell. She's the one who put her life at risk and made it to the top against all odds, making history. With some encouragement from other climbers, Lydia went public with her story. Luckily for Lydia, she's one of the only ones on our list to climb Everest illegally and make it out alive. Now, you might be wondering what the difference is between climbing Mount Everest legally and illegally. In order to make this trek legally, each climber needs a permit. If a climber is discovered using a route without a permit, there could be serious consequences. This is exactly what happened in our next story of the illegal expedition, led by Nimsdai Purja. Nimsdai Purja is a world-renowned climber. He's made his mark in the world of mountain climbing by climbing all 14 8,000ers in the span of 6 months and 6 days. You may have watched his epic documentary on Netflix called 14 Peaks. Nothing is impossible. While this mountaineer may have a lot of achievements under his name, he's no stranger to controversy. One of them includes his 2024 expedition up Mount Everest. Nimsdai had permits to climb on Lingtran Peak. Even though he had valid permits, he was not allowed to use them for other people. His company, Elite Exped, brought a group of climbers to Mount Everest. Each climber that he was with was supposed to have a permit to climb the route. However, they were under the impression that the company had obtained the permits for them. In certain situations, when there is a group traveling together, a permit may be shared. The permit to climb Lingtran Peak is $400. But this wasn't the route that the experienced climber wanted to take. He wanted to climb the Everest route. Permits for this route cost $11,000 per person. But this didn't stop Nimsdai and his group. They went for the journey anyway. There were 11 other climbers from different countries around the world. While this group didn't make it to the top, they did make it far enough to warrant an investigation. Allegedly, most of the group made it to Khumbu Glacier. Some of the stronger climbers even managed to make it to Camp 3. But there were some other controversies surrounding this climb. Allegedly, Nimsdai arranged to have a helicopter fly the group from Kathmandu to Camp 2, which is highly illegal. Helicopters aren't allowed past Everest Base Camp. He also led the group through an illegal section of the icefall on Mount Everest to get to Camp 3. Unnamed witnesses spoke to the Department of Tourism about what they saw. It wasn't just about the fact that these climbers didn't pay the fee. Some of the routes that Nimsdai was taking were very dangerous. Luckily, there were no injuries or fatalities from this climb. An investigation is currently taking place into the events. Elite Exped has denied the claims. It was also reported that permits were obtained for 2 of the climbers. The permits were obtained from 7 summit treks. These permits allowed the climbers to share with groups of up to 15 people. Kayla is a well-known and experienced climber. She's gone on many of Nimsdai's expeditions and is an ambassador for his store. But the other climbers were training at the base camp. Witnesses originally thought this was suspicious since the Lingtran Peak route is straightforward, like a hiking trail. At this point in time, there is no record of any penalties for Nimsdai and the other climbers. The investigation is still ongoing, so I may be able to update you guys at a later date. Do you think these climbers deserve a penalty for taking an illegal route? As we go from bad to worse, the stories start to get more gnarly. Marco Siffredi was the first person to descend Mount Everest on a snowboard. His first journey was in 2001, and it was a success. But when he attempted to do it a second time in 2002, things took an unexpected turn. On May 23, 2001, Marco Siffredi climbed to the top of Mount Everest for the first time. He had successfully gotten permits for this epic adventure and was approved by the Board of Nepal. When he initially set out on this climb, his goal was to snowboard down Hornbein Kulwa, the route he considered the holy grail for snowboarding. Unfortunately, this route didn't have enough snow, so Marco had to take the Norton Kulwa instead. While he encountered some problems with the strap on his snowboard, he was able to repair it and make it the whole way down the mountain. He made history that day and solidified his status in the snowboarding legend community. Can you imagine sitting around a fire with a group of snowboarders, all bragging about their bull runs, new lines, and tree runs when a voice pipes up through the dark and says, "I did a line down Mount Everest"? While this was a wild, record-breaking achievement, Marco wasn't satisfied. He wanted to snowboard down Hornbein Couloir, and he was determined to one way or another. And for Marco, that meant coloring outside the lines. So in September 2002, when he decided to try it again, he didn't have specific permits or permission for this highly dangerous, non-standard route. While autumn isn't the ideal season for climbing, Marco was focused on the conditions of the snow going down. He believed that the early autumn snow was just right for snowboarding. When Marco started his journey up the mountain, he had to trek through deep, snowy conditions. It took him 12.5 hours to reach the top. That was 3 times longer than his climb the previous year. When he got to the top of the mountain, he took some time to take in the breathtaking scenery. It was exactly how he imagined it. But before he started his journey down, the Sherpas that he climbed with felt something wasn't right. They warned him that it was getting late and that the conditions weren't good. However, Marco wasn't going to listen. He had other plans in mind and was excited to get into motion. As Marco made his way down the hill, the Sherpas went in the opposite direction to get shelter at the camp. They wanted to make it there before the storm came in. After trekking nearly 4,000 feet, they saw what they believed to be a figure. At the time, they thought that maybe it was Marco. But as they approached the area, they noticed that there were no track marks from the snowboard. The Sherpas then realized what they saw wasn't a figure. It was an apparition. With the poor conditions, they knew that Marco had gone on a death mission. Although they tried to convince him to camp out and descend the next day, the young snowboarder was headstrong about making it down the Holy Grail route. His impatience would cost him his life. When the Sherpas arrived back at the base camp, they learned that their worst fears had come true. Marco never made it back. To this day, his body and snowboard have never been found. But this isn't necessarily a shock. There have been plenty of people who disappear on Mount Everest and are never seen again. The most likely cause of death is that he fell victim to the summit's weather conditions, especially since a storm was beginning. There's also the possibility that he got trapped in an avalanche. Since the snow was incredibly deep that time of year, this could be another likely scenario. However, Marco's own sister, Chloe, paints a different picture of what she thinks happened. She believes that her brother simply continued his descent past the base camp and took off to Tibet. He's living freely, exploring the world one peak at a time. This next story is one of the most controversial. David Sharp was an experienced mountaineer who attempted to climb Mount Everest on his own without proper safety measures. There are many reasons why his death could have been avoided, and it still has people talking nearly 20 years later. David Sharp had climbed to the top of many mountain peaks, but it was Mount Everest that proved to be the biggest challenge for him. Before his fatal 2006 journey, he had already attempted this mountain twice. Both times, he had to turn back before reaching the summit. For his third journey, David was determined to reach the peak. He wanted to have as little weight on him as possible, so he decided not to take bottled oxygen. Ready for his venture, he started his solo climb on May 13, 2006. Now, before we can get into what happened to David Sharp, we need to tell you about green boots. If you know anything about Everest, you've likely already heard of green boots. In 1996, an Indian climber in bright green boots tragically froze to death while attempting the summit on Everest. The body was removed from the mountain in 2014, but until then, it was used as a landmark by climbers to give them an idea of how far along they are. On May 15, 2006, a group of climbers reached the cave where Green Boots lay. Only this time, they were in for a major shock. Green Boots wasn't the only person in there. Beside him was David Sharp. At this point, he was still alive, but he was sitting up silently with his legs crossed and icicles hanging from his face. The group tried to shout at him to get up, but he didn't respond. Unfortunately, this group carried on their way and didn't alert the base camp for help. Throughout the day, various groups of climbers passed David. Each group tried to get his attention. He never spoke a word, but he did wave some of the groups away. Each group that reported what they saw gave varying accounts of the state that he was in. Ultimately, it wasn't until a group of climbers guided by Maxime Shaya found David's body that they alerted the base camp for rescue. Maxime and the climbers sat with David, praying until the conditions forced them to leave. While they felt bad leaving him, they knew that there wasn't anything they could do to save him. This is one of the most controversial deaths on Mount Everest, because so many people saw him in a near-death state. Roughly 40 climbers passed through before Maxime's team discovered him. Why couldn't any of these climbers have radioed in for help? However, some climbers made claims that they did radio in for help and were told to leave him and continue back to camp. Sir Edmund Hillary, the first man to reach the top of Mount Everest, even commented on the event. He shared disgust at the reaction of the climbers and insisted that they were so driven to make it to the top that they left a man under a rock to die.
Their aim is to get to the summit, and the welfare of anybody on the way is just too bad.
However, others have defended the climbers, claiming that there wasn't anything they could have done to save him. How were they supposed to know that he didn't bring bottled oxygen? While David's climb wasn't strictly illegal, it was a series of bad, risky decisions on a mountain that will quickly eat you alive. Climbing solo, without a radio, satellite phone, or sufficient supplementary oxygen, significantly increased his risks and ultimately claimed his life. The story of David Sharp serves as a dire warning of why proper preparation is essential for making the climb. Going with an experienced group and bringing proper equipment, even if it weighs you down, could save your life. Our next story is about Pavel Kostrikin, a climber who attempted a climb illegally, not knowing what he would really get himself into. Like we've said, permits are mandatory for climbing Mount Everest. Climbers can only obtain permits for specific routes for climbing Mount Everest. This is done to ensure they are climbing a route that's safe for their journey. While these permits range in price, many mountaineers spend around $40,000 to $90,000 in total to climb Mount Everest. While this is a high cost, and certainly controversial in many ways, it could save a life. Pavel had a lot of passions in life: mathematics, economics, engineering, and most of all, climbing. He was an ambitious mountaineer who was determined to make it to the top of Mount Everest. However, his passion wasn't enough to make up for his lack of preparation. Pavel had attempted to climb Mount Everest before, but with no success. This would be his third attempt at the journey. Pavel enjoyed a wide range of outdoor activities. He was an experienced climber who was familiar with mountain tourism. After all, he had already climbed 6 out of 7 major mountain peaks. That is why the people who knew this man were shocked to learn that he was inadequately prepared for his climbing journey up Mount Everest. He didn't plan ahead safely, lacking support and not obtaining a permit, but he was still ready for his excursion, or so he thought. You might be surprised to find out this happened in 2022. Despite all the facts, the history, the gear, and the tragedies of Mount Everest, bad decisions and bad events are still happening. During his climb, Pavel was part of a small group. Unfortunately, the fact that he wasn't alone wasn't enough to save his life. He was doing the typical climber rotation of the 29,031 feet Everest before he fell sick. Very little detail is known about the exact events that led up to his sickness. What we do know is that the 55-year-old Russian started feeling altitude sickness while he was at Camp 2, about 21,000 feet in elevation. He had to be helped down to Camp 1, about 3,000 feet lower in elevation. It turns out that the reason this was his third attempt on Everest was that he had to keep turning around due to exhaustion. We don't know for sure, but it's possible he delayed turning around this time and going back down because it was his third try, and he was determined to summit. Altitude sickness is something that needs to be reacted to immediately, or the body will shut down. And sadly, Pavel passed away from acute mountain sickness. As this incident was investigated, it was discovered that the Russian mountaineer didn't have a permit for his climb. At the time of his death, Nepal had only issued permits for climbing Mount Everest to 17 Russians. Pavel died in 2022. Looking at the records in 2021, it showed that there were 295 deaths on Mount Everest, 197 of which were on the Nepal side. Nepal has since increased the number of permits issued. Could releasing more permits lead to fewer deaths on this notorious mountain? Pavel obviously died because of altitude sickness, which doesn't care if you have a permit or not. But the argument can be made that at least having a permit means a specific route has been cleared and considered safe, which could lead fewer climbers to go rogue in search of a summit bid. The last ill-fated climb I'm going to tell you about today is Fran Arsentiev. Her tragic story has named her the Sleeping Beauty of Mount Everest. However, her fate wasn't as happy as the iconic Disney princess. Don't go anywhere yet. This is one of the most shocking stories in our video today. In 1998, Fran Arsentiev accomplished one of her life goals. She became the first American female to reach the top of Mount Everest. Fran wasn't exactly an experienced climber. She wasn't even that passionate about outdoor activities and adventures. However, she was married to someone who was Sergei Arsentiev. Sergei was an experienced climber who had already made it to the top of 5 of the highest mountain peaks in Russia. This married couple decided they wanted to make history by being the first couple to make it to the top without using oxygen. Now, their journey up the peak was successful, which is obviously wildly impressive. They celebrated Fran's major accomplishment. They were 29,000 feet above ground without the use of oxygen. But as with many Everest disasters, it's not the climb to the top that gets you. It's going back down where things go sideways. The couple began their venture down the mountain. Witnesses report that they did reach the summit, where they stopped very briefly. But as the couple went back on their journey down the mountain, this was the last time they were seen alive together. Conditions became terrible, and visibility was almost zero as they tried to navigate back down to the nearest camp for safety. Tragically, the pair got separated in the blizzard-like weather. Fran kept going but eventually stopped trying to keep walking. She was freezing and couldn't see. Sergei, meanwhile, was trying to find where Fran was. The following day, 2 climbers who had briefly come across the couple began their journey back down. That's when they noticed a frozen climber in a familiar purple jacket. It was Fran, whom they had met before. At first, they feared the worst, but then they noticed she was moving in small jerks. There was still hope that she was alive, but they had no idea how they were going to help her. When they found her, she was delirious and was only saying 3 things on repeat. "Don't leave me. Why are you doing this to me? I am an American." While the climbers wanted to help, there was nothing they could do. The conditions on the mountain were getting worse, and they needed to get back to camp for their own safety. If they didn't leave Fran, they would have put their lives at risk. Fran eventually died from frostbite while being stranded. However, her body remained on site for several years. She was a marker, similar to Green Boots, only she was called Sleeping Beauty. Fran wasn't removed from the scene until 2007, when she was given a proper burial. Her body was covered by the American flag at the time she was removed, as a sign of respect. Her husband Sergei wasn't discovered until an entire year after the incident. It's believed that he died from a fall while attempting to save his wife. He may have thought his experience was enough to keep both him and his wife safe. But on the rugged, untamed slopes of Everest, experience isn't enough to keep anyone safe. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay bold and live brave.